Hey guys, how's it going? Danconia. Welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Week 13 preview. So, Week 13 is going to be an interesting one because this is where we get to see some matches we haven't actually seen yet. We're going to see some cross-NA matches, East vs West and all that good stuff. And remember, East vs West is where they're set up, not necessarily where the cities are. But also, the hero pool, if you didn't see the meta preview, it's McCree, Widowmaker, Hammond, and Mercy banned this week. So, yeah, that's going to be interesting. Normally, when McCree and Widowmaker are banned, Paris lose. So, yeah, I mean, they're up against Philadelphia. So, that's going to go well. Anyway, moving on, let's take a look at these fixtures then. And on Saturday, May the 2nd, yes, we are in May now, at 9 AM, we will see the Guangzhou Charge taking on the Seoul Dynasty. So, this is one of the teams that Seoul Dynasty hasn't faced in the Asian region right now. Last week they faced the Hangzhou Spark and the Shanghai Dragons. They sweeped the Spark and got swept by the Dragons. So Seoul, they're in a weird place right now. I'm kind of thinking of them as a sort of Atlanta Reign sort of thing, but it's still very early to know. So this game against Guangzhou Charge will give us a good indication of where Seoul are. Seoul, we are regarding as one of the best teams in this region, so I would expect them to get a fairly hefty victory over the Guangzhou Charge. But the Charge have a knack of making it difficult for teams, even for teams like New York and Shanghai, which they've played so far. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Guangzhou take a map or two off the Seoul Dynasty, but I don't know whether they've got enough to beat the quality of the Seoul Dynasty right now. So I would go for a Seoul Dynasty win, but Charge could make this a difficult one. But at 11 AM, we've got an incredible match on our hands. New York Excelsior taking on the Shanghai Dragons. So, Shanghai Dragons last week swept the Seoul Dynasty. And we were regarding Seoul Dynasty as one of the best teams in the league. And Shanghai kind of threw down the gauntlet and said, no, we are better than them. And it wasn't really all that close. It was a really good display by the Shanghai Dragons. So, that kind of changed people's thinking and made New York and Shanghai the top two teams in Asia. And now we get to see the clash of those two top teams, to see who comes out on the top, who gets the crown of best team in Asia right now. So, this is incredibly difficult. New York looked really good last week. They swept the Guangzhou Charge. They swept the Chengdu Hunters with relative ease. Guangzhou kind of gave them a little bit of a time of it, but Chengdu, they couldn't compete. So, two teams with an enormous amount of quality, and it's extremely, extremely difficult to call which one of these teams is going to come out on top. And all I hope is it goes the distance. All I hope is it goes the distance. I mean, we predicted last week that things were going to go the distance, and it didn't. So I'm not going to predict it, but I hope it does. But I think narrowly Shanghai might have the upper hand. Narrowly. But this could be a fixture that goes on in Asia for a while that could bat from one to the other winning. So I think Shanghai this time around, but man, I think it's going to be close. But moving on to later at the night then, we have a bit of a gap in between, and then at 8 PM BST we see Dallas Fuel taking on the Washington Justice. So this should be a comfortable fixture for the Fuel. It really, really should be. The Washington Justice haven't looked anything special of late. Dallas Fuel had a close but good victory over the Houston Outlaws last week. Dallas Fuel have looked like they've been improving. So this is the sort of litmus test for the Dallas Fuel. If they really are improving, if they are becoming a team that can be a play-ins team, if not better, then I expect them to get the win over the Washington Justice, and I expect them to do it fairly comfortably. And the one strong area of the Washington Justice is normally their DPS, and Dallas Fuel, at the moment, by far have got the better DPS. So I would go for a Dallas Fuel win, but you never quite know what Washington might pull out of their hat. I'd be disappointed if Fuel don't win this though. At 10 PM, we see the Los Angeles Valiant taking on the Atlanta Reign. So I don't believe we've seen this matchup this season. So it should be very interesting to see how these two teams square up against each other. Atlanta Reign, we are regarding as one of the better teams in the league. Valiant, it's difficult with the Valiant. When you look at who they've played so far this season, they played the Shock twice, they played the Fuel twice, they played Vancouver, and they played Gladiators, and they played Seoul. And they won against the Fuel. They won against the Fuel, and then lost narrowly to the Fuel, and they won against the Shock. So the Valiant haven't had an easy schedule so far, and this isn't an easy fixture. I would still expect the Valiant to lose to the Rain. But if they can make a good go of it, if they can take maps off the Rain, then I think things look bright for the Valiant in the future when they get to go up against slightly easier opposition, like the Defiant, like Boston. I say slightly easier, Boston are very much easier. Houston and people like that. I think Valiant may be able to pick up wins, Washington as well. So I think this will be interesting to see where the Valiant fall in this one, whether they just get completely swept aside, or they try, or they are successful in making it a close match. If they can make it a close match, then it should be really interesting in the future for the Valiant. But at midnight, which is crossing over to May the 3rd, we have the Houston Outlaws taking on the San Francisco Shock, yet another fixture we haven't seen this season. So Houston Outlaws have been improving, but coming off the back of that narrow loss to the last Fuel, which must hurt, going into a game against the Shock is never going to be easy. Now, yes, the Shock have lost Sinatra. Wow, they've lost Sinatra, who... Has he played this season? He's been a bench warmer for the Shock, let's be honest. So, the Shock losing Sinatra, and I'm being brutal here, the Shock losing Sinatra is not going to affect them. One bit. They have still got really powerful DPS, really powerful tanks, really powerful supports, and players who can play in a variety of roles. They are not just locked to their single role, like Architect and Rascal, who could play the supports if they wanted to. So, Shock have been getting back to their winning ways recently, and I expect that to continue here over the Outlaws. But I would hope Houston could at least give it a good go. I know that sounds like a bit defeatist, but I hope the Outlaws can give it a good go, because the Shock are a big team to be coming up against, and the Outlaws, they've got some good quality, but not quite the quality of the San Francisco Shock, let's be honest. But moving on to the proper next day fixture, so May the 3rd at 9 AM, we will see the Seoul Dynasty in a rematch from last week against the Hangzhou Spark. Again, I wouldn't expect much to change here. I would expect the Dynasty to sweep the Spark. The Spark are not, and I've said this multiple times now, they are not the team they were last season. They don't look like they can match the levels that they were at last season. They are in a difficult region, let's not forget that, but I don't think they're able to compete with the likes of Seoul, New York, Shanghai, and it's evident in the results at the moment. So I would hope this is a week where Seoul can recover from that battering by Shanghai and get 2-3-0s and kind of push on from there. But I think the bigger test for Dynasty this week might actually be the game against the Charge. I know the Charge have got problems with Neptuno and the likes, but I think that could be the bigger issue for the Dynasty this week, the Charge rather than the Spark. If they roll out with the same stuff that they did last week, I am sure they will probably get a fairly hefty victory out against the Spark. Unless the Spark improve. But again, the meta, the hero pool won't affect the Dynasty too much either. So I think the Dynasty should get a fairly hefty win here. At 11 AM, we will see Chengdu Hunters taking on New York Excelsior. Again, a rematch from last week. Again, I'm not expecting too much to change. Chengdu, I mean, I know we haven't seen London yet, but they are looking at like the worst team in Asia right now. New York are looking like one of the best. I'm sure we will find out if they are the best in the earlier game of this week. But I would expect New York to get a hefty victory here, regardless of the result against Shanghai earlier in the week, whether they need to bounce back or not. So, Chengdu, yeah, I mean, it's a nasty week. It's their only game this week, Chengdu, and that provides them with some good time to prepare for this New York Excelsior side, especially from the data they would have got last week in their dribbling against them. But unless New York seriously over-prepare for the Shanghai Dragons and really take the Chengdu Hunters for granted, then I expect Chengdu Hunters to fall by the wayside here, unfortunately. But moving on to NA, and at 8 PM BST, we will see the Philadelphia Fusion take on the Paris Eternal once again. So this is an interesting one, because when you look at the hero pools for this week with McCree and Widowmaker banned, Historically, that has not been brilliant for the Paris Eternal. But every time that has happened, they have lost to the weaker team. Now, the last time that Philadelphia Fusion lost was in Week 5, when McCree and Widowmaker were banned. Paris Eternal were just lost to the Houston Outlaws 3-0, and the Paris Eternal got a 3-2 win over the Philadelphia Fusion. So, it's the only match that Philadelphia Fusion have lost this season. It'll be very interesting. But one clear thing here is that both teams are coming into this with no other matches this weekend. And that's the great thing about NA at the moment, is that they are playing one match in the weekend, so they are preparing wholly and solely for that match, which is really, really interesting. But Fusion have got an incredible amount of quality, and I would expect Fusion to get a win here. Paris Eternal haven't looked quite the same since Hip left, and I still think they are adjusting slightly. So I will give the Fusion a benefit of the doubt here. It is possible that the Fusion could sweep this, but Paris Eternal should put up a good fight. But Fusion should get the win here. Moving on to 10 PM then, and we will see the Florida Mayhem take on the Boston Uprising once more, like we did last week. Now, last week it was the quickest win in Overwatch League history, with the Florida Mayhem spending about 24-25 minutes in game actually just beating the Boston Uprising. It wasn't close, it wasn't even remotely close, and to be quite honest, I wouldn't expect anything to change. Boston Uprising are bad, let's be honest. So, Florida Mayhem, you know, you could just try and beat your own record. I mean, there's always that. That's it. I would expect Florida Mayhem to get a 3-0 victory over the Boston Uprising, considering what they did last week. Even if it's a slightly more difficult for them than it was last week, I still expect them to get a 3-0 victory over the likes of Boston, because, well, I expect most teams to beat Boston 3-0. So that's it. But the last game will be on midnight on Monday, May the 4th. It will be the Toronto Defiant back in action against the Los Angeles Gladiators, two teams we haven't seen last week. And this is actually quite an interesting one, because Toronto, they've looked shaky recently. And they've kind of gone down a bit in my estimations. Los Angeles Gladiators, I could also say the same for them. They haven't been as good as I thought they'd be, because they showed us a really good side to them earlier on in the season, and it's kind of just tailed off from there, and they find themselves in the middle of the league. And they kind of tilted against the Los Angeles Valiant when they were last out as well. So this is going to be an interesting one, because if the Toronto Defiant can hang with the Los Angeles Gladiators, then I think I can start giving the Defiant more credit. But if the Gladiators sweep this, then I think the Gladiators are on course to be one of those top 8 or so teams, and the Defiant are on course to be bottom half, trying to scrape into the play-ins, hopefully, maybe. It's going to be an interesting one, that one. It's going to be very, very interesting, and I'm most interested in seeing what the Defiant come out with, because the Defiant have been so up and down this season. I would like to see some consistency from this side going forward. But that rounds us out for Week 13. Week 13 is going to be interesting. We are going to see some very interesting matchups, like the Fusion versus the Eternal, like the Excelsior taking on the Dragons, Charge maybe versus Dynasty maybe, could be an interesting one. But we're also going to see some matches which we're not expecting to be all that one-sided, like the Outlaws Shock, like the Mayhem Uprising is the most glaring example of this, Hunters versus Excelsior. So it'll be interesting, but now I've said that some of those matches are going to be very one-sided. They're probably not going to be, because that's exactly what happened last week. I said they were going to be very close, and they were all very one-sided. But that is going to be it for this week. Next week will be incredibly interesting, because we will be seeing 11 fixtures, not 10, and we will see the return of the London Spitfire to competitive play next week. So that should be really, really interesting. We'll also see the return of Vancouver in week 14 as well. So I'm going to round it out for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you in the next video. See you then.